Hello and welcome to lesson one of a new study. We're moving into the book of Nehemiah, Old Testament book, rotating to the Old Testament from the book of Mark. Today's lesson is called Discovering Our Kingdom Assignment. And the idea is that God's got something for us all to do. You don't ever get done. Even if you're homebound and can't get around, you can pray, and that's a big deal. And so, our assignment in the kingdom never ends until you take your last breath and go to glory. Nehemiah 1 through 3, the main idea is God has a kingdom plan for all of us, just as he did for Ezra and Nehemiah. So, thought I'd do a little bit of background today on the book of Nehemiah and kind of talk about where this thing fits. If you look at the Old Testament, it's huge. Man, takes you months to just work your way through it. You've got the beginnings, which is Genesis and Exodus. You've got the patriarchs within the book of Genesis, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Got the Exodus, Moses, book of Exodus. You have the conquest of Canaan. Moses led the people out, was ready to lead them in, and they balked because of the giants in the land, and Moses led them around for 40 years. Finally, Joshua led them in, Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. When Joshua leaves the scene, you have the time of the judges, where there was a vacuum of leadership. God would send a judge, they would help for a while, and next thing you know, they'd die, and there would be a vacuum of leadership, and the people would sink. And finally, the people cried out for a king, and that really wasn't God's will. And the prophets weren't happy about that, but God said, "Well, give them what they want. I'm a God of free will." So then you had the time of the United Kingdom. Saul, David, Solomon, one king over the whole schmear. Saul was a terrible king. David was a little better. Solomon, worse. Led them into lots of idolatry. So after Solomon died, there was a civil war, basically, and there was Israel in the north with a king and Judah in the south with a king. First and Second Kings, so a divided kingdom. In 722 BC, Assyria destroyed the northern kingdom, but could not take Judah because of Jerusalem. It's a major city. It's a walled city. They finally gave up and went home and left them alone. So you got Judah alone. 586 BC, the Babylonians overthrow the Assyrians. They become the superpower in the north, and they send troops down. And in 586 BC, they destroy the wall around the city, which was the gateway in, and they come in and they raze the city, took everybody into exile back to Babylon, and destroy the temple. So you have the time of the exile. The next is the time of the restoration. The Persians and the Medes overthrew Babylon, and King Cyrus allowed the Israelites to go home and rebuild their temple. But after 70 years in Babylon, most of them stayed put. So there was a remnant that went back to restore the temple, work on the wall around the city, and just kind of get Jerusalem going again. In the meantime, it was havoc, for those that came back. The people who were left were desperados and attacked them while they were trying to do their work to rebuild the wall and the temple. Then you have the time between the Testaments, the Old Testament and the New Testament. And we're looking at this last time period, the time of the restoration, and that's where it really all kind of comes together. Let me give you a little bit of background on four leaders that were very prominent during this time. In 539 BC, Cyrus, king of Persia, this is 70 years after Jeremiah's day, he sent out a decree stating that the Hebrews could return to Israel and rebuild the house of the Lord. He was not a believer, but God used him. And that's how that works in the Old Testament. I guess he still does that. But Cyrus said, yeah, you can go back. I'll help you. I'll give you free passage and even fund it a little bit. So he was the first leader that kicked this off. And 3 years later, Zerubbabel led a group of 42,360 priests, Levites, and others. They went almost 800 miles back to Jerusalem to start rebuilding the temple. The temple that Solomon built was glorious because he had the resources. These people don't. And so even the temple that was rebuilt was a remnant. Never the same as it was in Solomon's day. It was so bad that in the New Testament, Herod did a repair project on it to try to earn favor with the Jews, which didn't work. But it was not the same. And I guess that's just how things are, you can only do what you can do. So Ezra, in 457 BC, Ezra led some Jews back to restore the vessels of the temple. See, they restored the building, but it wasn't very well, they didn't have the stuff in it that they needed. And so he went back and he led a reconciliation work between the people and the Lord. There were reasons God allowed this to happen, and he wanted to make sure that they were square with the Lord and kind of go from there. So in 444 BC, Nehemiah led a third group back to rebuild the walls around the city for its protection. The walls of Jerusalem suited it well, and for a long, long time. And so we would say this is part of the old city, the walls. And really, even in the Middle Ages, walls are a very practical thing. You go to Rome. Rome had a wall around it. Canterbury had a wall around it. England. And so very practical thing. So Nehemiah is in particular trying to get the wall rebuilt for the city's protection. Kind of a big deal. Well, let's read what the passage says today. And here we go. Verse is 1 through 3. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Halkalah. Now it happened in the month of Chislev in the 20th year while I was in Susa, the capital. This is up in Old Babylon, which is taken over by Persia. That Hananiah, one of my brothers, and some men from Judah came. This is Jerusalem. And I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped and had survived the captivity. These were people who weren't carted off into captivity. Now, there were reasons they weren't. They were poor. They were no threat to the Babylonians, so they left them. And asked about Jerusalem. They said to me, the remnant there in the province who survived the captivity are in great distress and reproach. And the wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates are burned with fire. Now, just because Persia controlled this area doesn't mean that there's peace in the land. It was, there's just people who were lawless, manipulating the weak and fighting against any progress that was being made. And so one of the things you're going to see is when Nehemiah goes down to repair the wall, they're going to be construction people on the one hand, but guards armed to defend themselves on the other. So we got to get the wall back up to protect the city, to give some stability to the land. So he says, there's people there, they're in great distress, but the wall around the city is broken down and the gates were burned with fire. So it's been sitting in disrepair for a while, and it's just opening the door for mischief. And so the wall needs to be rebuilt to give some stability. And Nehemiah gets this. So he is the cupbearer to the king of Persia. He's a very powerful man. He's Jewish, but he has a lot of power. He's gained a lot of respect on behalf of the king. Now, on the one hand, he was the one who tasted all the drink and the food to make sure the king wasn't being poisoned. Can you imagine having that job? But he had become a friend, and he had become a trusted advisor to Cyrus. And so what's going to happen is he's going to have to ask the king to let him go, to go back. He feels like this is God's will for his life. And that's kind of the point of the lesson. God has a will for all of us. Are you doing it? What is it? Oh Lord, I beseech you, your ear be attentive to the prayers of your servant and the prayer of your servants who delight to revere your name and to make your servant successful today, and grant him compassion before this man, which is the king. He's like, Lord, I'm going to go to the king and ask for permission to go back. I pray that he will say yes. He ends with saying, now I was the cupbearer to the king. So he's kind of like the people in the West Wing of the White House. Yeah, the king has power, but his advisors run the show and take care of day-to-day business, so they have a lot of power too. So we're setting up this lesson for Nehemiah to go back and rebuild the wall. We don't kind of get that. It'd be like Israel today without their protection from the Iron Dome. By now, they'd be blown up and disintegrated if we had not provided the Iron Dome missile defense system, which they use quite a bit, very accurate, mechanically as far as shooting down incoming missiles. The wall had to be built for Israel to have any stability and any hope of moving forward. So let me share with you 3 truths as we move forward with the lesson. The first one is that Nehemiah believed that the Lord had a will for his life, and he was faithful to his understanding of what that was. It's like, I believe that God wants me to go back. I have a place in my heart for the city and the people that are left there. And he was a person that could do it. He had the ability to do it. Second truth is following the Lord may uproot you from your comfortable way of life. He's going from a kind of a dangerous job, but cushy job with lots of power and prestige, to going out and trying to take on a monumental task that's kind of a thankless task. He's going to be uprooted from stability to go do that, and sometimes that's the way it is when you follow the Lord. Third truth is Nehemiah's sacrifice provided a way forward for his people that's lasted almost 2,500 years. If Nehemiah had not been used of the Lord to rebuild that temple, there may not have been a Jerusalem today. It would have just been part of history, and that would have been the end of it. But Jerusalem is thriving today, and Nehemiah is to be thanked for that. Well, I pray you have a good week, enjoying the warm weather. I know I am. Jesus, we love you. We love each other. I thank you that you have a will for our life. I pray that we would know it and do it. It's in your name that I pray. Amen. Y'all have a great week. Do something productive.